Welcome back to Close Mode. I'm Dan Sanchez, and I'm here with Brian Dietmeyer. And today we're going to be talking about coaching at the 51-yard line. Now, as somebody who's a newbie to this whole sales coaching thing, Brian, like I've been in marketing long enough to know what sales coaching is. I've had great friends in the sales space. I've worked with them. I've sales marketing alignment. We're always having conversations about that. But I got to say, like, I'm not super familiar with this coaching on the back half. Like almost all of my experiences on Challenger and spin selling and all these other frameworks that are on the front half. So why is there even a need to have a separate philosophy, methodology, or reason for coaching differently on the back half than on the front half?
Yeah, it's, in a past life, I was a VP of national account sales at a Fortune 50. I've been a sales coach and deal coach for a number of years. And it's when people talk about deal coaching, it's kind of this monolithic, here's how I coach. And what we've realized as we zero more in on, it's funny because I say the 51-yard line, and for people who are football fans like I am, it's actually after the 50 would be the 49. And I say that, and I just realized that we picked up after the 50, which would be roughly the 49. But much like football, and I apologize to people who don't like football, it's the best metaphor I can come up with, but you have a set of plays that gets you from the 0 to the 50. And then your plays change. Once you cross over into the opponent's territory, your plays switch and are reduced. Once you get into the red zone, which is the 20-yard line, your plays change yet again. And yet the play that's set up for sales coaching tends to focus much more on the front half. A lot of methodologies, Challenger, Medic, some what you've mentioned will get you to the 50 really, really well. So the question is, what are the right process steps after the 51? What data do we need to compete? It becomes less about sort of methodology and that kind of thing, and more about it. Well, here's the simplest way I can say it, Dan. The world shrinks. When you get to mid-stage in a deal, up front, it's who are all the buyers? What are all their possible needs? And let me do discovery question, which is very open-ended. Hey, what's keeping you awake at night? What's on your plate? All these, who are all the possible competitors? What's all the possible solutions you might be able to sell them? In the second half of the deal, all that shrinks. It's, okay, we have an idea who the players are. We have an idea what they're going to buy. We have an idea who the competitor is. And now it gets down to sort of who are the key players? What are the 2 or 3 key things that are going to swing the deal our way with these 2 or 3 key players? What's the optimal solution to build for them right now? Because we know a lot more. It even comes to requalifying. And, even before some of that's done, to say we know a lot more. We qualified the thing up front. We've heard sales VPs say, why is they get very frustrated to say, I'm pulled in to coach on a deal. We shouldn't be going after this thing in the first place. It wasn't even properly qualified. So we now qualify at a nano level. We do discovery now, more guided discovery, more focused in with the right people on specific things, right? And even down to the level of, there's a bunch of commercial terms we have to talk about. Where are we going to get heat? What are the 2 or 3 things we really need to focus on? So when I say the world shrinks, that's what I'm talking about. And it's really, those are the plays that work. And then even inside the red zone, getting the thing negotiated and closed is yet another set of plays.
Let's camp out on this analogy for a little bit, because I'm not an avid football player, so I don't know how the plays change. But I assume, based on even the way you're talking, that in the beginning, when you're trying to get it to the halfway point, you're probably making some broad plays. You're trying to get some mass yardage. I'm guessing in the midway, you're starting to be a little bit more conservative, but still make some steady progress. And in the red zone, when you're getting really close, it's about micro progress, right? Yeah. It's about little steps just to get it that little bit farther. You're not throwing risky long passes. They're fighting harder, and you only need a little bit of yardage in order to get even closer to your goal. Is that true for football? And then does that carry over?
I think it's directionally accurate. The plays that you have shrink as you move through that sport and you move down the field, and what I would say is it's similar. Well, they change with selling and coaching, is that it's about much more granular nano level stuff. Again, it's about, let's requalify the thing because we know a lot more, and forget the account level qualification. It probably already, now we're at the opportunity level. Let's dive deep into the opportunity and find out where it fits and doesn't fit. Do we not have access to executives? Are they not buying our full complement
Yeah.
of stuff?
So
Yeah, those kinds of things. It's really getting it down. These are the things that matter. This is what we know after doing whoever $20 billion in deal coaching. It comes down to these fewer moving points that are kind of harder to get to, but we have to, that's our true north. That's what we have to be getting after. The stuff that makes a difference up front, we're not entirely clear what's going to make a difference. We better figure it out now.
So the picture is becoming clearer to me. I'm like, okay, I could see what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and why there's a difference between one and the other. The football analogy is working for me, even though I'm not a football dude, and that's okay. I'm sure a percentage of the audience isn't, and that's good.
Yeah.
Because if I'm
Yeah.
getting it, I'm sure other people are picking it up.
Yep.
But like, now let's get to the practicals. Assuming I'm going to be one of your deal coaches doing this, like tomorrow, I'm just going to start asking questions as if I have to execute this. How does one know you were at the halfway point? Like how would you know a deal is at the halfway point?
Yeah. Yeah. And typically when we get brought in to coach on an opportunity, it's saying, okay, we know there's an opportunity, right? This isn't at the top of the funnel, right? So we know there's an opportunity. We've at least talked to some of the stakeholders. We have an idea of some of their needs at a broad level. There's a couple uncovered stakeholders. We're maybe not crystal clear on the size of, or the holistic nature of the opportunity or the solution we can sell. We've got a pretty good idea who the competing alternative is. And maybe they've already started complaining about you guys are too expensive. Maybe we're even getting into the commercial terms part of it, but we know there's a live fish on the line and it's getting super competitive at this moment, right? They're beginning to think about making their decision, and we need to get well ahead of this thing and stop reacting and start proactively leading in the second half. We need to be smarter about their decision than they are. We need to be thinking more about the commercial terms packages and the solutioning than they are, and know more about it than the other side.
So there's a general interest there. They're in market. There's a problem.
Yeah.
And you now have relationships with, if not the main decision maker, but a couple other stakeholders within the organization.
Yeah.
That much we know. And once we have those things confirmed, we're at the middle deal here.
Yeah. Yeah. And usually it's sitting in forecast, and you and I have talked on other podcasts about forecast accuracy and deal slippage. A lot of that's out there. So these things are being forecasted and they're slipping because we do know a lot of that upfront stuff, but we haven't gotten to this nano level yet. And we shouldn't be throwing these things into our forecast at 90% close without knowing the key moving parts that are really going to make a difference in this deal. And that's why I say coaching is different. Back to the opening of the discussion, coaching to get down to that, that kind of not quite microscope level, but, getting really into the details really makes a difference now.
Tell me what the coaching looks like when we're at this stage. Now that we've defined how we've entered this stage from the pre-sale conversations, we know we have a good opportunity, and I've just all those things I just mentioned. What does it look like now versus what it looked like later? What does middle coaching look like?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's the thing that benefits a seller most is data at this moment, right? To say, okay, I know that it's likely this solution I'm selling. I know it's likely this competing alternative. And what we've found reps need help with, even with all the data that's coming from product and product marketing, is, okay, at the granular level, for each one of these buying influences, how do I figure out what's key to them? And we can help them in coaching to say these are typical sort of key criteria people are using to evaluate, and we can present to them, here's places where we have an edge over this alternative, even in this region, and that's the kind of stuff that they're looking for. And even and data on, we can kind of what I call crowdsource to, when you even get to the commercial terms, to say, I can tell you, Dan, you're likely to get a lot of pressure on these two commercial terms. So get ready for that, and it's less about methodology and tips and tricks and process steps. And it's more about, here's the data you need to compete versus the alternative. Here's how you need to drive the solutioning and the commercial terms discussion and be ahead of and leading versus reacting to. And that all comes down to having the coach, and this is what I love about AI is my human coaches couldn't have that much context in their head. We can put that much context into AI, and it's never going to get tired, even if you're talking to it at 11 o'clock at night. You have access to it. So yeah, it's more about data and insights that help you prepare better than the competition and better than the customer.
Yeah. What are common things when you've rolled up onto these deals and they're halfway through the deal and you're coming in as a coach yourself, not one of your people, are common things that common questions you're approaching them with when you start interacting with them on a middle deal?
So many times they're reacting. We coached in a couple $1 billion of renewals, and when we started working with the deal teams, the most common thing that they were hearing, and they weren't sharing it with one another, right? But we were looking across many renewals, and the most common thing was not a competitor, but it's I won't renew. Right. And the customer is saying, I'm not going to renew unless you meet this license price. And so one, they weren't sharing that. And they would immediately, even very seasoned deal pursuit teams would immediately go to, is that a license price we can even think about? Forget license price. So this is the most common mistake in mid to late. We need to go back to understanding, okay, if their alternative is what they call going dark, I'm going to do nothing. I'm just going to let my contract expire. We need analytics. This is back to my insight. We need analytics and data on what going dark looks like for this customer, given their goals at this moment. Yeah. And what we found when we started, and just said, forget the commercial terms discussion for a moment. What we found in a majority of these deals is when we were prepping the deal teams for this to say, this is going to be your most likely competing alternative is go dark or do nothing. And here are the pluses and minuses, with different customers based on what they're trying to achieve of going dark. And we found that it wasn't so easy for customers to go dark, which then, by the way, informs how we respond to the commercial term thing.
Yeah.
But if we start with commercial terms, we start selling scared. And that's what we see is the most common thing is people walking in, selling scared. Customer has all the power. Let's talk about these terms that they want. Huge mistake.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the biggest thing you're coming in or questions you're asking is around competing alternatives at the middle stage. You need more information around their competing alternatives. That way you can actually understand where the company sits in the competitive landscape, which is going to guide your end zone and red zone coaching game.
Nice use of red zone, Dan. So customers make suboptimal decisions, by the way, right? They're looking at maybe the most readily available criteria in their brain to make a decision between you and some alternative. And typically, we like to reframe that whole thing in terms of decision making, right? So they're making suboptimal decisions. They're focusing on the wrong things, perhaps, and missing other things. And so that's part of our goal is to help them make more optimal decisions. We should know more about if we're selling firewall protection software. We should know more about how to make decisions on that firewall protection software. And we should be in a consultative role of who should be involved, what criteria should be involved, and what should be most or least important. And then, of course, we have to net out when that's all said and done, what stakeholders and what criteria are we really resonating? Because that's our value proposition, which is another rant. Value propositions are usually vague, and it's the value proposition changes a little on every deal, and it's the 2 or 3 reasons why you help them meet their business goals at higher confidence and lower risk than whatever alternative it is, and that's when people will buy, and that's when we can overcome a suboptimal decision process by saying, hey, it's a fear, uncertainty, and doubt thing. Have you thought about, if you go dark and let this contract expire, have you thought about the impact on your end user customers because they don't have the latest version of whatever? And, and hopefully through the guided discovery, we do this thing, Dan, we call signaling, where the coach will build signaling questions for the rep up front before this happens to say, hey, customer, when you think about letting the contract expire, have you thought about how that impacts your end user customers? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we call it signaling because, quite frankly, I don't even care if you answer these questions. I want to get some of these criteria and some of these stakeholders in your head. You can't do that unless you have good data. You have to have better data than the customer. And you need to be able to, in a consultative manner, lead them to the most. This is actually a customer-friendly approach. It's like, I'm going to help you make the most holistic decision you can possibly make, because we do this a lot. You do this every now and then. We do this day in and day out.
So I'm seeing it's starting to connect in my mind. It's almost like in the pre discovery calls before the you get to the middle of the sales process. A lot of the discovery process is built to help the company understand if this prospect is good for us. When you're getting into the mid zone, you're now trying to gather information not to see if it's good for you, but to prove that it's good to them
Yeah.
compared to all their alternatives.
Yeah.
So it's funny because a lot of this, the tactical things of asking questions and getting data is the same, but the intent behind it has changed. Am I getting closer?
Well, precisely. It is almost a repeat of we need to qualify, we need to requalify, we need to rediscover. But it's now at a nano level, and a lot of the discovery up front, and I'm sure many of you have seen these articles, open-ended discovery, the customers telling you what they already know so you can get smart on their business. There's zero value in it for them. And it's making that transition on the front end from what's keeping you awake at night, Dan, to on the back end saying this is what should be keeping you awake at night. Right? This is where I now have a better sense of this overall deal. And here's the kinds of things you should be thinking about. And so we're going from leading. I find the front end is a little more kind of reactive and open-ended and just sort of downloading data to get as smart as the customer. On the back end, we have got to get into leading the decision. We've got to be able to get into leading them on solutioning and even leading them on the commercial terms packages. Customers tend to only focus on one or two items when there might be 10 or, price is a subset of volume and length of contract and services and SLAs and all these other things. But they're only focusing on a couple of things. Again, we need to lead at every step of this. It changes the way we qualify. It changes these guided discovery questions. It's similar, but much more surgical.
Yeah. So I'm getting a sense of what the middle game looks like. What does it look like in the end? So in the middle, we've gathered more information. We've found out what their competing alternative is and figured out how to measure the effect of those alternatives to be able to compare our solution to it effectively in a way that best aligns with the what they want. But how does the coaching change again when we're getting close to the finish?
Yeah. So it's the easiest way I can think about that. Having done this for a while, there's two or three things in my career that just kind of exploded my brain. And so I ran a negotiation training and consulting firm with the vice chair of the Harvard Negotiation Project for years. And we were, of course, using, building off of what we learned from them. And we did a research, believe it or not, this is getting to answer your question, but we did a research project. I'm going to give you the short version, talking to sellers in 19 countries over 2 years. Part of this research project asked them, what do you hear in the moment of truth inside the 20 in the red zone? What do the buyers say to you that knocks you back on your heels? It was kind of a random thing we threw into it. And we have a data analyst here, and I had her dig through it, thousands and thousands of mean stuff that buyers said to sellers all over the world. And I said, go, Lena, go in here, see if you can find any kind of patterns. And she came back and said about 47% said over here, and about 50% said over here. And Dan, and for anyone else listening, I said, wait a minute, you just told me 97% of mean stuff buyers said to sellers all over the world falls into two categories. I was sure that was incorrect. We went back and recoded, and every new sales team we sign up, we ask them the same question. And this is one of those moments that kind of exploded my brain. So what's going to happen 97% of the time in the end game is the customer is going to do two things. They're going to refer to their alternative and try to commoditize you in some way. And then they're going to put pressure on you to give stuff away. The most common tactic globally is I can get the same thing from someone else cheaper. Now, so they're either going to say, throw it in for free, lower your price, it's not in my budget, which is a concession tactic, or they're going to go, your competitor's better, faster, which is an alternative tactic, and most often combine them. You might say, so what? We already know if we're 6 months out, I'll already tell you within 97% probability what's going to happen in the red zone. They're going to do that. So we need to start changing that conversation early. And it's still, some version of that's still likely to happen. But to know that's coming your way and hear those words and go, oh, I get it. And I already have data prepared for same thing and cheaper, or some version of that, because I know that's what's coming my way.
So how does that lead you to coaching differently?
Yeah. So it means that if we know within 97% probability this death conversation, which is same thing cheaper or some version thereof, We need to start changing that early. And again, we need data and insight on those 2 points. We need to do discovery. We need to be in front of the right people, getting data in front of them to start changing that conversation long before we get there. We're never going to make it go away, but the goal is to start changing the conversation earlier in the deal cycle with facts, data, and insight, knowing that's where it's going. So, and then also, so part of it is, as you said earlier, is the, why us versus some alternative. We better know that at a nano level about what the customer is trying to achieve, and the 2 or 3 reasons with the key stakeholders, why us. We better anticipate where the pressure is going to come from on commercial terms. I've coached a bunch of deals with strategic account managers who are like top of the food chain in the sales world, right? And end of the quarter stuff, and they're all panicking. Oh, yeah. They just came in and said our competitor undercut us by 10%. And it's like, of course they did. Why are you shocked? You should be shocked if they come in and say, you know what, Dan, I've done the analysis. You're so much better than that alternative. You should lift your prices by 20%. That should surprise us. But the fact that we know where this is going to end up. We need the data and insights. We need to change the conversation. We need to be ready for the commercial terms plan. We already know where the pressure is going to come from. We need to get the quid pro quos, our whole commercial terms strategy in front of us. The other thing that we coach in this kind of 11th hour inside the red zone is presenting what we call multiple solution options. Deal teams make the mistake of coming to the customer with our offer. The natural human inclination is to come back and say, I want that offer cheaper. And, maybe on another show, we can talk about how to build these. But what we want to be able to do is there's usually an offer the customer is asking for that's somewhat tactical and cheapest. And then there's something we want to sell that's this monster, and we want to come in and present 3 solutions to the customer at 3 different effectiveness and investment levels, 3 different ways to solve their business problems. That's the brand. It's not the price of our offer. Here is our proposal. It's, I have 3 different ways to solve your business problems at 3 different effectiveness and investment levels. And customers typically don't take any one of those 3, but it radically changes the conversation, because the next piece for the deal team is to say, okay, I've presented these to you. Rack and stack these for me. What do you find most to least desirable? And then, Dan, let's work on co-creating a 4th that gets rid of some of what you don't like, add some of what you like. And so that's kind of the final play, is in terms of changing the conversation, is changing it from the price of an offer to the value of 3 different ways to solve business needs.
We did dive a little bit more into this in a particular episode called Strategic Negotiation Part 4, Dividing Value for Better Deals, where we dove a little bit more about how you're setting up the 3 deals. Yeah. For those who want to go back and reference it, I'll drop a link to that episode below in the show notes. It was part of a 4-part series on strategic negotiation. I'm sure there's still more granular details that weren't even covered in that episode for a future episode for sure.
Well, the only detail that I want to add to that is titling of these things is really important. So we think about, we present 3 solutions. The first part of presenting this to you, Dan, is to say, here's the business problem I'm solving for you. I'm going to raise your throughput by 4%. I'm going to reduce defects by 2%. And then the next part is, here's my solution. Here's all the elements of my solution that are included. And here's the associated commercial terms. Now I have another one that's going to, increase throughput by 6% and reduce defects by 8%. Here's the products and services, and here's the investment. Radically different discussion, but branding in term, these are not good, better, best, gold, silver, bronze. These are 3 different business metrics that are important to you, and you make the choice. And to, which do you want to drive, which is going to determine the solution, which is going to determine the commercial terms. And all these things are inextricably interlinked.
I think that's a really important insight for me, because I think I even titled it Good, Better, Best earlier in this episode, but it's not Good, Better, Best. This isn't a pricing table where it's more of our software or less of our software, more of our software, all of our software. It's not that. It's customized solutions that are all good, depending on what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah.
To call them Good, Better, Best is to not do it correctly.
Yeah. But they might be like internally, this might be, the best possible solution for the customer, but that they're going to determine it's best based on the throughput and the defect reduction that are associated with that package. That's the part that's really important. And typically what happens is they're asking for the most tactical, least expensive solution. We're trying to get this monster on the table. And typically what happens is we're moving up when we're co-creating, we're moving from 3 to 2, right? And so we're one-upping the game in terms of what this whole solution looks like. And that, I would say, is the most typical outcome, which is pretty good in terms of deal optimization. We've talked a lot about win rate, but this is deal optimization. Am I getting the right solution in front of the customer more than what they asked for? And am I getting the commercial terms in a way that's going to make my deal desk happy?
What question should sales leaders be asking about how well they're coaching this last stage? Like, is it are hardly? I'll have to defer this to you, but are most people not coaching at all in this like midpoint to end game when it comes to the sales process?
So in designing the close strong solution, one of my co-founders and I talked to 40 companies and 60 people, CROs, VPs of sales, global sales enablement leads. And we asked them all the question about closed plan. Do you have a closed plan? Like we have, again, we're using Medic and Challenger to get us through, but when you get here, what happens? And I'm going to give you the short version is almost to a person, all hell breaks loose. Everyone's kind of doing it their own way. Now, some people had some things in place, but the question are those the right things? Are those the right process steps? Are those the right data? Do we really know what wins deals? So that's what we're seeing. That's why I argue so much about we can't think of coaching monolithically, because there is a different thing that's happening on the back end. It's much more surgical, and it requires, in one sense, it's simpler because we want to take all the moving parts and move them down to the moving parts that matter. That's different questions. That's different data that you need. And we're not seeing Jim Dickey with Sales Mastery, which led me to this whole football analogy. Wrote an article in CRM magazine called The Red Zone. And I'm going to screw up Jim's numbers, but these are directionally accurate. Let's say that the average NFL team that gets into the red zone scores like 50% of the time. The 2 Super Bowl teams last year scored, their average score inside the red zone was in the 70s. And so that's, they obviously, I mean, maybe they had better talent. They also did, his point is they did a lot more work on it. They did a lot more, workshopping, if you will, and had better close plans inside the 20. He also has data for people who feel like they're highly effective inside the 20. Their win rate was almost 2x of people who feel they're really bad at it. Their deal optimization, how big were their deals, how healthy were their deals, was almost 10x of people who feel like they suck inside the red zone. So there's an awful lot of data to say good things happen when you have systematic, in terms of not so much deal slippage, better close rates and better deal optimization, when you take a second half approach to this thing and realize that it is different and the game is changing a little bit in the second half. And it's without a doubt, for sure, the truth will out. If you get better at this, the numbers get better.
Yeah. So I will be linking to that report in the show notes. Please take a look at that. Take a look at the past episode and ask yourself how well you're closing your deals. If you have a close plan, if you're a sales leader and you don't know the answer, might want to go take an audit to see what's happening on the floor and evaluate how well you're currently doing. So then you can begin setting benchmarks and trying to improve how you're going from the middle of the game all the way to the end.
Yeah. And
Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. And I will close with this. You and I did another session, I think you mentioned it earlier, on that close plan. So maybe we can link to that as well if you want to see Absolutely. What's in that closed plan or hear what's in that closed plan at a high level. It is based on 20 years of getting deals closed. So feel free to take a look at that. Thanks again, Dan. It's always fun.